If you're thinking about getting one of these older Mercedes diesels, or you own one or plan to own one for any length of time, you'll probably have to at some point replace the motor mounts. Now, this is not a difficult job under normal circumstances, and I'll explain a little bit more about that as we go along in this video. We have a motor mount kit that comes with complete instructions. I would not say it's a beginner DIY job. It's more like an intermediate, but it is something you can do yourself and save quite a bit of money. If you're planning to do this job yourself, there's a number of things that you should be aware of, and that's the purpose of this video. In fact, I've heard reports the last couple of years that people are running into more and more problems with motor mount changes, primarily due to the age of the cars and subject to corrosion problems, particularly those old diesels that have been driven around areas that use road salt. Don't expect that replacing motor mounts is just going to be a cakewalk. The other thing I'm learning is a lot of people are running into problems with the bolts that hold the motor mount to the motor mount arm, and I'll explain a little bit more about that as we go along in this video. So there's a number of challenges that are occurring, and I know from the type of parts and tools that people are buying from us and from some of the reports we've heard from our customers that there's some real challenges out there. And so I've laid a bunch of stuff out here on my bench, some problem parts, some issues that I see can really cause great stress for you. I'm going to go over those and then show you some of the things that I'm working on right now to help you prevent some of what I call big wrench dances occurring when you go to change your own motor mounts in your own older Mercedes diesel. Now, some people say, well, Ken, how come I have to change motor mounts all the time in my diesel? What I've learned is over the years is if you have old shaky old out of tune diesel, don't expect your motor mounts to last very long. The life of the motor mount is directly related to the amount of vibration in your engine. And if you've got an engine that's got a weak compression or inconsistent compression, you got an engine that you've just ignored the fuel injectors and they're not firing equally, and you've got a lot of shake and motion in the engine, when you install new motor mounts, don't expect them to last for years, okay? The other thing is, if you do find out your motor mounts are bad, and you can usually tell you have bad motor mounts, when you shut the engine off, it'll shake and clunk. That is the first sign that your motor mounts are going bad. If you hear clunking noises when you turn the key off and the engine rolls to a stop, that's the number one sign. The other sign is kind of a harsh, excessive amount of vibration as you're sitting in the driver's seat with the engine running. Because what's happening is you've got metal on metal vibration with the motor mount arm dropping down onto the mount bracket or the shield, and it's sitting there vibrating, and you'll feel kind of a abrupt vibration. So be sure and check those out. And if you think you can ignore bad motor mounts, you better think again, because I have actually seen bad motor mounts ruin a diesel engine. What it does is it causes so much stress on the crankshaft that it can ruin your connecting rods. So this is something you do not want to ignore. Now, not only are these motor mounts under extreme stress when you have excessive engine vibration, but the other thing that's under a lot of stress are the bolts. Now, these are the bolts that go up through the bottom of the motor mount, and they bolt right into the aluminum arm. So you can imagine the amount of stress on the aluminum threads in the arm as this engine is vibrating and shaking mile after mile. So a lot of people are having problems removing these bolts, and what happens is the bolt heads round out, and then you have what I call a big wrench dance. So what I've been working on is ways to prevent this from happening to you if you have one of these diesels. And what happens is the bolt, as it works in there, will start to stretch these threads. The other problem is corrosion. Once again, if you've lived in an area, or the car's been in an area where they've used road salt, this can be a real problem, just getting these bolts out. A lot of times as you remove this bolt, and you'll find that it'll come out very, very hard. It'll be like you can just almost feel it galling the threads. And if you find this is happening, you need to be ready to deal with the threads in the arm once you remove the bolts. Because once again, you've got to be able to jack the engine up, pull that bolt out from under it, get these mounts out, get the new mounts in. And once again, we have complete instructions that come with the mounts we sell on my website, but I want to address particularly these threads right here. If you're fortunate and the bolt comes out easily, you will be able to reinsert the bolt and it should just go right back in. You see that? It should go in by hand. Now I'm going to stress, this is so important, when you're reinstalling these motor mount bolts, you want to have them go all the way in by hand until they bottom out. If you have to force them and use a wrench early on, then you better just stop and try to solve the problem. Or you're going to end up with a situation like I'm sure this owner had with this, because I pulled this off a 300 SD and look at, someone has actually drilled out this hole and enlarged it to a number 12 metric bolt. And it's really bad. You can see it's all galled down in there. And even though he's probably tried to tap that out, he hasn't been real successful. And that's the case with a lot of these aluminum arms. You'll have a very difficult time drilling them oversized and tapping them and getting it right. All right. That's a real challenge right there. Once again, back to this bolt. If the bolt goes in and out easily by hand, hey, you should be happy. You can rest assured that you're not going to probably have a problem with that. But now let me show you this motor mount arm that I recently pulled off a 300D. The engine was just removed from the car. The bolt came out fairly hard, but it was not galling the threads. It didn't look too bad. And now we're going to install the bolt back into the hole and watch what happens here. See that? It goes in about one thread and then gets hard. Now if you think you can just put a wrench on there and reef that in, you're going to end up with this situation here. You follow me? I'm going to warn you. Heed this warning. Do not force these bolts into these motor mount arms. So what I've done is I've come up with a thread chaser that I'm going to supply on my website and in some of my kits. You don't need a tap. A tap can actually do excessive damage to the aluminum thread if you don't use it properly. So what I've created here is a thread chaser. Now I want you to watch as I use this thread chaser to see if I can clean up these threads enough that we can run this bolt in by hand. Now you would have the engine jacked up and the motor mount out of the way so that you would be doing it like this. And you would be starting it by hand. You want to be very careful to make sure that starts in there straight. That's why I've put a taper on the chaser thread so that you can get this started and get it lined up before you put a wrench to it. And I'm just going to spray lubricant down in these threads. It's not critical what you use. You could even use engine oil or hydraulic fluid. Just get some type of lubricant into those threads before you start using the thread chaser. Now once again, this is going to be sitting like this, so you'll probably have to coat the thread chaser with some lubricant. And then you're going to start it like this. Once again, I'm going to try to do this as if you were doing it on your engine. And you want to turn it in and out, make sure it's lined up straight. And then you can take and put a 17mm wrench to it. I like a ratcheting box. This will be something that you'll be able to work down in there quite easily. Now it's getting a little hard right here, okay? But we're going to keep running this in. Okay, now it's running a little bit easier. Once again, even using this thread chaser, if it starts to bind up on you, stop. It means it's probably not going in straight. You're going to feel some resistance there, but if you have to start really torquing on this bolt, you want to stop and back it out and rethink what you're doing. I know in severe cases, these threads could be ruined and a thread chaser may not help. In that case, I recommend you try to locate a good used motor mount arm rather than try to drill that and retap it. All right, I'm going to run this in. Now it's running real easy. It probably will come out by hand now. Once I've cleaned those initial threads at the beginning, usually what happens is those ending threads, or the threads right at the opening, get deformed as you run the bolt out. Okay, now I can see the metal particles. Now let's flip this over. I'll let you see this, and we're going to take this bolt again, and we're going to see how it goes down in those threads now. Okay, it's still a little stiff. I don't like that. So if it's still a little stiff, I'm going to go ahead and run the chaser in one more time. I've run the chaser in a second time and it's coming out freely by hand. Now I'm going to check the factory bolt again. Okay, see, it's going in, but right about here it's tightening up on me. Now does that mean that my thread chaser's bad? Well, this is going to prove my second point. Not only do the threads in the arms deform over time due to excessive engine vibration, but these threads on these factory bolts also can slightly deform. So I've sourced a new bolt, which I believe is stronger than the original factory bolt. And now let's see how the new bolt goes in, because that's going to give us an idea whether the problem is here with the threads in the arm or whether it's with the old original OE bolt. Okay, look at that. See that? All the way down, all the way out, easy by hand. So there's two reasons why you might want to use new bolts. One is you may find that the hex head has rounded out a little bit. These bolts from the factory tend to be a little bit softer than the bolts I'm providing, so these tend to want to round out more. And if you see any rounding out, or if you've had a problem removing the bolts, then you want to replace them. The other thing is, take a good close look at the threads. If the threads appear to be at all deformed, or you're finding that it's not going in as smooth even after using a thread chaser, then I would recommend you get a new bolt. Now there's something we do here at Mercedessource to modify the new bolts that we get in, because we want to make it easier for you to get them started. And let me explain. When you have this new mount in place and you go back under the car and let's say you lower the engine down onto the mount, sometimes it's really difficult to get up in there and get the bolt started. If you start it at an angle and start to cross thread it, once again, you have a big problem. Now notice here how the factory bolt starts. You have to put it up against this and you have to have it perfectly straight to get it started. Watch this. See, if I have it slightly bent and I start to turn it, see that? It doesn't want to go. So what I've done is I've modified the tip of the new bolts that we provide on my website, and even if you're slightly off like this, see, and you start to turn it, it wants to line up. See that? It's going to go out, and then you just back it up and you start it. That's the key. You know, even if you're slightly off, you start to turn it in by hand, it starts to bind, just back it up a little bit and twist again until you get it to go in like that. So this gives you a little bit more latitude on alignment with this bolt to actually get them started in the motor mount arm and to prevent cross-threading as you tighten them down. Now let me explain some of the other things we're doing to help prevent problems. I believe that these bolts, because they're steel, going into aluminum, should always be installed using a copper-based anti-seize compound. Now, I'm not talking about gooping up all the threads and making it ooze out, because you don't want this bolt to loosen up. So we provide a heavy-duty lock with the bolt set that I've sourced so that you can use anti-seize compound and the bolt won't back out. You just put a very, very thin film of anti-seize compound. And I believe that this could be the #1 reason why people are having a lot of problems with these bolts, is because anti-seize was never in there. And they've started to seize up. They want to gall the aluminum threads when you try to back them out, and you end up rounding out the head of the bolt, you end up breaking the bolt, you end up stripping out the threads in the motor mount arm. And you all know who've done this. You're going to say, Kit, you're right. This is a huge problem when you start out and all you're going to do is just change a couple motor mounts, which only should take a few hours. Turns out to be a week-long job, waiting to find parts, waiting to find solutions. So in my replacement bolt kit for the motor mount arms, you get 2 bolts, 2 lock washers, and the copper anti-seize. If you have any question about the condition of your original bolts, don't try to replace them. Oh, I can't tell you how many emails we are getting from people now that are running into problems with these bolts and with the threads in the motor mount arms. I'm just going to put this thread chaser up that you can buy individually. It won't be very expensive, and this will really help you if you've got any tightness in those threads at all. Be sure and chase the threads before you reinstall the bolt. We also have a couple tools here. It took me about 6 months to source this particular hex socket. Not all hex sockets are created equal. Not all of them fit tight in the heads. And what I wanted was a socket, a really heavy duty, 1/2-inch drive, high quality metric socket. This is 8mm that would go into these heads and fit tight. See that? Without a lot of slop. So if you're trying to use a cheap hex wrench that has a lot of slop in the head of the bolt when you're trying to remove it from the motor mount arm, you could round out this hex right here. And there's no way you can get the bolt out of there other than sawing through the mount right here or drilling out the head of the bolt, and it just becomes a huge problem. So always, I'm going to repeat it again, always use a very high quality 1/2-inch drive hex socket when you're removing the bolts from the motor mount arms, okay? The other thing is getting to these two bolts here, these two smaller bolts that hold the motor mount to the subframe of the car can be a real challenge. Because once again, you have, you've pulled the bolt, you've jacked the motor up, but you still don't have a lot of room to work. So what I came up with was a little toolkit that will help you get these 6mm head bolts out. It's a little ratcheting screwdriver, and I've got a short one that you put in like this. You can get in here like this. You can get this little L in there by hand to work these loose, and you even have a long attachment. So between these 3 attachments, you can get under the motor mount arm, you can get to these 2 bolts here and get them off the frame. That's the other big challenge you may be faced with. Once again, if these are rusty, you're going to have to really fight it. And what I would recommend, if you've got rusty bolts that you're having a hard time breaking loose, use this one, get it on the bolt, and then get a pipe. Get some sort of a pipe so you can get out here and get some leverage, and you can break that free. I think you can see why people are having problems with their motor mount arms, their threads, and their bolts. And if you need any help with this, be sure and email us at Mercedessource.com. I'll put some links in the description of this video, which will kind of take you to all these parts related to diesel engine motor mounts.